Welcome to This Love Works, the podcast that is raising the bar for exceptional relationships. Join psychotherapist Marianne Marlowe as she talks with couples who've mastered the art of healthy, passionate relationships. They explore what makes their real love work and dig into topics featuring cutting-edge research and relationship science. Let's listen in. This is Marianne Marlowe of This Love Works. And today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about the pressure of having to juggle all the demands of work and kids and all the other stuff you've got going and your marriage. And the big question that I want us to really look at today is, does someone always have to be unhappy? And what I want to say about that is, while someone doesn't always have to be unhappy, usually someone is unhappy, which is why they come in and see me, right? Which is why we're asking this question in the first place. So Kelly is joining me today, my super duper assistant and office manager and all good things. Kelly, she's actually been really supportive of the podcast, and she's got some really interesting things to say. So I wanted to invite her here today so that she could talk. And let's talk a little bit about this, Kelly. So what do you think about what you hear with your friends and unhappiness in relationships, right? Like the question, does somebody always have to be unhappy?
A lot of the stuff that I hear from my friends is either one is working outside of the house and one is working inside of the house. And they almost are like trying to keep score on who's doing what and how much they're each doing. And so there's arguments over that. And then another thing is that I hear a lot about is one partner, their interests are different than the other partner as far as home life. So one person is really focused on their home and upkeep. The other one is more interested in nature and wanting to go out and doing things. And so the struggle in regards to that.
The nest, taking care of the nest and going out and having fun. We have that in my family for sure. My husband is definitely the one who likes going out and having fun. And I am the one that likes to be home and take care of the nest. And that doesn't always mesh, right? We don't always have the same kinds of things going on. And that, in my mind, would go to one of the top 5 things that couples argue about, right? Which is mess. The other things that we hear are money, right? Or resources, kids, or if you don't have kids, like the other family members and friends that you might have, mess, I mentioned. And then there is sex, which is also, considered affection or physical connection. And then finally, work or outside interests like hiking, being out in nature, right? So that hits 2 of the top 5 things: the mess and the outside things or work, right? The other things that we spend our time on that are not part of the relationship. And then the other thing that you talked about with your friends were, keeping score. Who's doing more housework? Who's doing more kid work? And who's bringing home, the bacon? Who's working outside? And you're right. I hear that as well, that there's always something. So in addition to, we know that the 5 things that couples fight about, those things hit the top 5. And usually when couples are unhappy, they're talking about some kind of imbalance in those 5 things. One of the things that we really want to focus on is how we manage those things and what agreements that we make as a couple. And a lot of times what I'm hearing is that couples don't literally make agreements around that, right? Like some couples will say, okay, let's do chores, and here's a chore chart, and I'll do the bathroom and the kitchen, and you do the cooking and whatever, picking up dog poop, whatever it happens to be in your family. But most of the time, couples are not intentional about how to manage those 5 things, right? How are we going to manage our resources? Many couples don't even sit down and budget together. It happens sort of, organically, like the housework happens kind of organically. We're not very specific about it. We're not intentional about it. And that's when we can really run into some trouble. So I think one of the most important things for us to really pay attention to is, let's be intentional about these things that are important. And let's recognize that we're different people, and we have the things that are important to us might be really different, and sometimes I'll ask a couple, let's do a scaling exercise. And of those 5 things, each of you rate, on a scale of 1 to 5, what are the most important things for you with regard to your life outside of, just the relationship. And let's talk a little bit about how to manage those things. And, obviously people are going to say, well, money, we have to have money. That should be the most important thing. Or really what I hear mostly is the kids, right? Well, the kids, we have to pay attention to them most because they need us most. Now, that's true, that our children, because we've decided to have children, or any heartbeat in the family, whether it be kids or pets, our furry children, or other family members, we still have to prioritize the relationship. Because let's look at we always talk about the oxygen mask exercise, right? If you don't put the oxygen mask on, you can't help anybody else. So that's true of the relationship. You've got to be really strong and have a secure, functioning relationship in order to do any kind of problem solving. So I always say, first comes the relationship. That has to be prioritized over everything else. And then just personally, without any kind of shaming, rank the other 5 things for you so that both of you have an understanding of what's the most important thing. Now, when I talk about kids or friends or other family members, what I'm not suggesting is that we should give up our responsibility for those things. What I'm talking more about is, where do we want to spend our time and our energy outside of the responsibility of raising children? And what we want to be really clear about is, part of raising children is spending quality time with them, right? So that's kind of like in its own separate space. And then when we look at the list of those 5 things, right, the money, kids, mess, work, and sex, where do we want to prioritize all of each of those things? And then take a look at that from each partner to have an understanding. Well, we may not be fully aligned with that, and that's okay. How are we going to manage that? And that goes back to the secure functioning piece.
So I heard you say secure functioning before also, and I've heard you say it. Can you explain a little more about what secure functioning is?
Yeah, I think that's really one of the most important things for couples to have an understanding of. It's the behavior of turning toward the relationship rather than turning outside the relationship for our essential emotional and physical needs, right? So what that means is, and Stan Tatkin does a great job of outlining what he calls the 10 commandments, or his relationship essentials. And if we look at those things, we have a very clear picture based on some of the social science research about what bonds a couple and what creates security within the couple. That means when a couple turns toward each other and makes the other person the most important thing, then everything can flow through that, right? When a couple knows that their partner has their back totally unconditionally and really recognizes that they are the person that you go to when you have important things to talk about for your own sense of well-being and security, that is what secure functioning is all about. Now, I want to put a huge caveat to that, because a lot of people, especially now, because we have a clear understanding of what codependency is, secure functioning is interdependency. It's not codependency. So codependency means that you're giving up some essential part of you, something that's really important to you, and you're setting that aside, and it is harmful for you, right, for the relationship, in service of the relationship or someone else's feelings, right? So in other words, you and I are in relationship, and I am worried that you are going to get mad if I bring up the topic of money. So rather than bringing up the topic of money, which is really important to me, and I really want to talk a little bit about putting a budget together, because I'm worried that you're going to get mad, I bury that. I don't talk about it. I become afraid. So I give up something really important to me in service of thinking that you're going to be upset by it. So I don't want to upset you. So I'm not going to talk about it. That's what codependency is really all about. It's not, hey, you want to go to a Chinese restaurant and I would rather have Italian. Well, I'm just going to go to Chinese. And that's not codependency. Okay. Unless, here's where it crosses over into codependency, unless I then punish you for the entire meal by saying, I really wanted to go to a different restaurant and I just felt kind of bullied by you. And right, that's codependency. But, sometimes giving in to what my partner wants because I love them in a way that I'm not going to feel resentful about, that's interdependency. That's not codependency, right? So we have to kind of pay attention to the fine line between codependency and interdependency. But usually codependency, that's where we hear unhappiness, right? So the question of, does somebody always have to be unhappy as you're juggling all the demands of, work and marriage and kids? Usually when there's unhappiness, it tells me that there's some codependency in the relationship. So interdependency is when you have two people who have clarity around who they are, and they come together in a loving relationship to support one another in the most effective way in fulfilling their life goals. So that's interdependency. And all the behaviors that are connected to interdependency are the secure functioning behaviors, right? Like turning to your partner, letting your partner be the go-to, making sure that any time that you've created a mess, right? Because we're all going to do that. We're all going to step in it. We're all going to make mistakes. The most important thing is that I repair that mistake with you right away, right? So those are some of the secure functioning behaviors that we're talking about.
I love that. Yeah. I notice sometimes what I will do is I feel like I'm so understanding, like he wants to go out, it fills his tank, he wants to go hiking, that gives him energy, makes him feel good. I love that. So I'm like, yep, go, even though I really wanted him to work on a couple things in the house. So I could see that line of almost going into codependency because I'm angry. I'll say, yeah, go ahead and go. I understand that, but then I'm like resentful.
Right. And sort of like beating him up in your mind, for 2 hours, right? Well, while they're gone, figuring out all the ways that I'm going to subtly bring up how I'm going to sort of torture him with doing housework once my husband gets home, right? So let's talk a little bit about those are some of the pitfalls. Those are some of the things that can happen. Let's talk a little bit about the imbalance, because that's where I think a lot of this kind of gets off track, and the imbalance of job duties, if you will, right? Like one person goes out and earns the lucre and brings that back, and the other person takes care of what's happening at home. And as you mentioned, sometimes we hear this both with couples where both of them work, or maybe one of them works outside the home and one of them works inside the home. And now, it's so funny because now with everybody working from home, it's like, okay, everybody is a stay-at-home, parent, as well as a stay-at-home mom or dad, as well as working, right? So we've kind of started to blur some of those lines. And I do think that it's been kind of an interesting thing for couples to see exactly, to have sort of a peer behind the curtain about what each of them does. But let's talk a little bit about that in the framework of imbalance, because I think that this is really one of the most important things that comes up for couples, is that they perceive, or it's real, that there is an imbalance in some part of the couple's life. And when I first start working with a couple, I like to talk to them about how they create something that's really special and unique. The couple bond is really an important thing to pay attention to, because it's separate of each of them individually, right? It is, when it is properly managed by each of them individually, it is the foundation on which each person can have their needs met in a really deep and rich way. And when attention has been put onto the, what Stan Tatkin calls the couple bubble, I oftentimes refer to it as the couple bond. When that is properly cared for, then all of the individual needs can be met in a really healthy way. And, two are better than one. And that's true, right? When we can put our energy and resources into that couple bond, then it reaps huge rewards for each person individually, right? That's oftentimes what we know changes the course. It was fascinating. I used to work in social services, 25, 30 years ago. And I worked for federal job training programs. And one of the things that we saw that was kind of fascinating was that the one factor that moved people out of the welfare system was coupling up, was having a dual income family. Now, it wasn't just the money that we started to recognize, right? Well, that was really important, having two incomes, or two people that were supporting, more than one person, right? Oftentimes person has kids or whatever when they're in the welfare system. But the support that was then developed was actually the most important factor that helped somebody to be off welfare over a longer period of time, right? So the support system that's created with a couple is really, like I said, it's two are better than one, but two doesn't always equal just two, right? The energy of two people coming together can be exponential. So that's really important. But let's get back to the idea of having imbalance. One of the most important things I think that happens for couples is that they don't do enough work around having understanding with each other, right? Like when we come together and I've got, I'm feeling like there's an imbalance, that I've been doing more housework than you, or I've been managing the kids more than you, and I want us to talk about that. Oftentimes what'll happen is I start with a beef, right, that I have with you about not doing enough because I feel like this is out of balance. And then what happens is that the conversation devolves into problem solving, oftentimes by the other person, which is, not a bad way to go, but we've skipped something that's so important. So the way out of these feelings of imbalance or the perception of imbalance is to have what's called a structured conversation. And structured conversations are not the kind of conversations that we just come to our partner with and, kind of like blurt out what's bothering us. But a structured conversation includes some of the things that we talk about in other podcasts or videos, which are you've got to prepare for a conversation with our partner. And this is such a huge thing that we skip over on a regular basis, right? I don't come to my partner and say, when I'm triggered, I oftentimes, when I'm not my best and highest, I'll just come and kind of like blast out, did you leave this here? And, and rather than really getting a hold of myself. So the first thing that I have to do is create like an emotional boundary with myself, right? When I'm that triggered, I need to be able to not that I can't share being angry or upset or frustrated with my person, but I've got to be able to do it in a way that he can hear me. And so the most important thing that I like to talk about is preparation. When I go to my person, are you open to having a quick conversation? Right now, sometimes it's not a quick conversation. So I also have to give him some space to let him know, this is a longer conversation. I do want us to do some problem solving. Maybe it's around budget. I really want you to hear me. But sometimes if it's about, like cleaning up the kitchen counter because he left crap on it, I want to say, hey, are you open to just like listening to me for a couple minutes? And then being able to talk a little bit about what it is that I need to talk about. But the very first thing is preparation. So I've got to prepare myself, create some personal boundaries around that. And I have to also prepare my partner. Is he available for me right now? Is she open to listening to what I have to say? And maybe she's not in the right frame of mind. So I have to also allow for that. And if not now, we have to set a specific time for when. So that's the very first thing that we want to pay attention to. The other thing too that I would say is, go to one of the structured conversations, use one of the Harville-Hendrix tools for the couple's dialogue, or use a Gottman tool, a 3-step Gottman tool, which is really not problem solving. This is true also for Harville-Hendrix or any other structured conversation that you can have, but ensuring that you are focused on listening to each other for understanding rather than just problem solving, which is, a lot of times what we get into. So I want to turn toward my partner, and I like to think about it in the terms of context versus content. So context is, listen, I love you. I want us to have a productive conversation here, or shortcutting that by showing you that I respect you and asking if this is a good time to talk, right? That's context. That's, I care about you. I want us to have a good conversation here. Content is blasting you for all the stuff that you left out on the counter. So I want to shift the conversation to understanding. That's the very first thing we have to pay attention to. Is once we've established this is the right time, then I want to make sure that we're going to have a conversation where you understand me rather than problem solving. So I want you to just listen. And then after listening, maybe even, mirroring or paraphrasing as in the Harville-Hendrix work. But I want to put my feelings into words, right? So if I'm mad, I want to be able to say, hey, listen, I'm really frustrated. I spent a lot of time cleaning the kitchen, and I come out, during my break off my, 5th Zoom call, and I notice that there are crumbs all over the counter, and there's, I see that there's dishes here And, I'm really frustrated and I'm upset by that. So I've put my feelings into words rather than showing you that I'm mad by either giving you the silent treatment or blasting you, with some kind of a verbal expression. The second thing that I want to ensure is that we're talking in expansive ways, right? So asking open-ended questions of your partner. Tell me more about what you're feeling or experiencing. That's really important. And then being able to talk from the I position rather than, you're a jerk, you've left this here, so here's how I'm experiencing this, and being able to have an open-ended conversation around that. And Harville Hendrix uses the expression of mirroring or paraphrasing, where you're literally using your partner's words back so that they know that you really understand them. And you can even ask for that kind of a conversation. Hey, I sometimes will check in and say to my husband, can you tell me what you think that I just heard? Or what you just heard, because I want to make sure that he does hear the essence of what it is that I'm trying to communicate. I want to be understood, right? So then the next thing is to have some kind of validation that, yeah, I get you. I see where you're coming from here. It makes sense to me. Now, the thing that we want to pay attention to is that it doesn't necessarily mean that I agree. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm agreeing with your position. But what I am doing is I'm seeing your position, right? I talk about this. I'm getting on the same side of the issue. I'm with you. I got you. I have your back. I understand how you can see it that way. And then finally, empathizing, right? Using feeling words to let your partner know that they have been understood. Right. And that's the one thing when I ask for that kind of a conversation, I want to make sure that my partner understands why I'm frustrated or hurt ultimately, right? Because we know that when we express anger, that's a cover emotion. And usually there's something underneath. I try and help couples to understand what's underneath your frustration. What is it really that's bothering you? And in the case of, cleaning for an hour, making sure that the kitchen is nice and clean, and then coming out and seeing that my partner left a bunch of stuff on the counter actually kind of hurts me because it feels like my hard work has not been respected. So when I'm able to get there, then we can have a really deep conversation of understanding. And, then, my husband can say, I really understand, I get why you would feel disrespected. And, sometimes I even create to close the loop on ensuring that we have early repair. We can have an apology, which is, hey, I'm really sorry. And then an amends, which is, I'm going to work harder to ensure that I'm putting my dishes where they actually belong rather than just leaving them casually on the counter, which feels disrespectful to you. Right. So having a structured conversation for understanding is a really critical way for us to get out of those feelings of imbalance.
I'm assuming that that takes some practice.
It does take some practice. And it's funny, sometimes I'll bring a couple a tool, and I'll say, listen, just use it by saying pass the salt. That's one of when I use the couples dialogue, the Harville Hendrix work with couples, I will often say, just use this to say pass the salt. Because once you've gotten those steps into your bones, into your nervous system, once you've really integrated those steps, then it's much easier to do it when you're under pressure or when there's stress. When we can practice it in low risk, emotionally low risk times, like pass a salt and integrate it, then we can use it for those times when it's a little bit heated. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, so that's one way that we can really help couples to feel a little less unhappy with each other and on the same side of issues, especially when there's a feeling of imbalance. And so we will see you next time on the This Love Works podcast. Bye for now.